The human brain is involved in the decisions about sex and the events following far more than what seems apparent. Have you ever really thought about that before? Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, my name is Marty Mandak and I am the Education Director and Prison Specialist here for My Choice Education. And today I'm kind of doing a part 2 of building off of the brain development video that if you haven't checked that out yet, BJ talks a lot about our brain development and how our brains are made up and how they function. And it's really, really fascinating stuff. And so I think you should check that out as well. And then in this video today, what I want to be talking about is the brain chemicals. So you have all sorts of neurohormones and chemicals in your brain that are firing for different reasons all throughout the day. I don't know if you know this, but your brain is super intelligent and your brain is super important. So if you didn't know that, now you do. But your brain does a lot of really cool stuff. And I mean, I could go through like endorphins, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, serotonin. There's so many chemicals, but specifically when we're talking about here at My Choice Education, relationships, there are 3 chemicals that we like to kind of highlight because they're super important in not only when you act certain ways or do certain things, they release in your brain, but they also have lasting effects and they kind of all mesh together in a way. And so I kind of want to just walk you through that rather quickly today. If you have more questions about this, you can definitely look these chemicals up online and read more about them. You can always set up an appointment in our clinic and we can sit down and talk to you more specifically about these. But I kind of want to just give you the highlight points of each one and then give you a quick example at the end that I think will kind of tie everything together. And so thank you so much for joining in and let's kind of jump right in. So the first chemical I want to talk to you about, most people have probably heard about, maybe, but it's dopamine. And dopamine is just very generally known as the feel-good chemical. Okay, it is the thing that releases in your brain that just makes you feel awesome. Okay, and so it's a great influencer on human behavior because of that. Because whenever you do something that makes you feel good, obviously that's going to influence you to want to do it again. Okay. And so not only that, but it produces these feelings of energy and excitement. And additionally, it's not just about making us feel good. It has this magical ability to make us feel the need to repeat that same behavior in order to get that feeling back. So dopamine kind of has like these levels, right? Where if you do the same thing over and over again and it made you feel good the first time, after a while, your brain loves patterns of behavior. And so the more you do something, the more your brain is going to kind of rewire itself to get used to that pattern of behavior and it'll become second nature to you. So something that may have given you like this rush of adrenaline the very first time you ever did it, although the next time you do it, it will give you that same rush of dopamine. It may not be quite as strong. And then obviously weeks and months and maybe even years down the road, it's just not quite doing it for you anymore. And so maybe what happens is dopamine kind of makes you go seek that high, so to speak, that good feeling once again. And so this is one of the driving forces behind addiction. You see this a lot in people who struggle with different types of addiction, not just in substance abuse, but other things like sex addiction and gambling and video games and shopping addictions, things like that. That's all dopamine driven because you do it for a certain period of time. Like if we take a drug addict, for example, and they're getting high off the same drug for so long, eventually that's not really going to do it for them anymore. So they go try to find an even greater high. And it's, I've been told, I teach in prison and a lot of the inmates that I've interacted with over the past few years, they've been very transparent with me. And they say that there's literally a thing called chasing the high. And that is dopamine at work. It's looking for that next high. When the drug wears off, go get it again. And over time, after a few months of doing the same drug over and over again, dopamine's like, nah, I need something better. You need something better. But the biggest thing I want to mention about dopamine before we move on is that it is what we call here values neutral, which what that means is that it is not good, it is not bad, it cannot distinguish between something that's good and something that's bad. It's just a chemical that exists, neutral in value. So although that's kind of cool, it also is kind of a bummer because this thing that makes you feel good, It can make you feel good about something that's not actually good for you, but it doesn't care. If you've triggered dopamine chemicals to release in your brain, you're going to feel awesome, whether it's shooting up heroin, driving 120 miles an hour down the road, riding a roller coaster, passing a test, or eating an ice cream cone. Different levels of dopamine release, yes, but there's no prejudgment in that. And what's really, really interesting, and this is another reason why we want you to go back to the brain development video, is we talk about the prefrontal cortex, which is right behind your forehead. It's the last part of the brain to develop. That is the portion of the brain that is the center for sound decision making and moral reasoning. And guess what part of the brain dopamine floods the most? The prefrontal cortex. And so your judgment and your moral reasoning on a dopamine high of whatever might not be the best. And so there's so many different things I could say about that, but I'm just going to leave that there. So it's really something to just consider when we're talking about this. But I want to also mention two other chemicals, and I'm going to kind of talk about them in tandem because they are very similar. In fact, in a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of, in some circles, they are oftentimes considered the monogamy molecule because they almost do the exact same thing that the other chemical does, apart from other bodily functions and things like that. But when it comes to what we're talking about here in sexual choices and relationship choices, both of these chemicals, their molecular makeup is almost identical. It's actually kind of cool. It's one of those like find the 6 differences types things. If you see them side by side, their molecular structure, they look almost identical. And those two chemicals are oxytocin and vasopressin. Both males and females have different levels of oxytocin and vasopressin. But when it comes to a lot of fields of study and a lot of the things that we've kind of found in our own research, oxytocin is very, very prevalent in a lot of big key moments in females' lives. Things like sexual activity, things like childbirth and labor, and things like nursing. Now, I don't know about you, but so I'm married and I have a couple kids. I had part in one of those activities, but I've not done the other two, nor do I volunteer to do the other two. So I do not go through labor. I did not go through nursing or breastfeeding. But oxytocin plays a huge role in that. And I'm not here to talk about babies today, but just know that oxytocin, if you look it up, I'm telling you, it is a powerful chemical when it comes to the female's role as in that motherly role. And so, but with that being said, its main primary function in regards to sexual activity and in comparison with vasopressin is that it's like a bonding chemical. So whenever you have sexual activity, even it's been proven that even a 20-second hug can cause an oxytocin release in the brain where you almost feel bonded to this person. It increases the desire for more touching. It causes this partial bond to the person with whom you're in physical contact with, and it kind of kicks in the brain trust circuits rather. And so it's super powerful. Both oxytocin and vasopressin kind of have this bonding agent. And so when you're in physical contact with someone, these chemicals are releasing and they're bonding you to this person. And that sounds wonderful when you intend for it to be that way. However, just like dopamine, oxytocin and vasopressin are values neutral. And so when something is values neutral, again, it cannot distinguish between something that's good, bad, right, wrong, moral, or immoral. It also can't distinguish between a lifelong committed relationship and a one-night stand. If oxytocin and vasopressin are triggered to release, they're going to bond you to someone that maybe you had no intention of bonding to. And so all of that to say, I kind of want to paint this picture for you in the classrooms and even in the jails whenever I teach. We use this duct tape experiment. And so first and foremost, I just want to say we're not comparing anybody to duct tape, okay? It's just a really good representation of how these chemicals work, and I want to kind of just walk you through that really quickly as we end this video. But imagine you have a piece of duct tape, right? And this piece of duct tape, if you think about tape in general, it has the sticky substance on the bottom that is supposed to adhere to whatever surface you stick it to. And that's not meant to be applied and then ripped off and then reapplied and then ripped off, because what happens to that adhesive, that stickiness on the tape, the more you do that? Well, it weakens. If you've ever stuck a piece of tape to multiple surfaces, after time, it's kind of like it's not really sticking that well anymore. Well, if you think about that in terms of hooking up and breaking up, so a relationship and you allow that stickiness, that adhesive to kind of represent the brain chemicals. At first, whenever you first, hook up with someone or have sex with someone, the brain chemicals almost adhere you to that person. They want to bond you to them. Vasopressin, oxytocin, and don't forget dopamine is also kicking in there, because what you're doing feels good. It's something that's going to drive you to want to do it again and again and again. But if you're constantly hooking up and breaking up, this pattern of hookup, breakup, okay, what that's doing is it's creating a pattern of activity in your brain because of these powerful neurochemicals. And remember, the brain loves patterns of activity, which then can hardwire short-term relationships into a person's mind without even realizing it. Why is that? Well, when you form a bond and you break it, and then you form it and break it, your brain can actually just stop firing these neurochemicals altogether, because your brain is very intelligent, but it might just kind of say to yourself, well, what's the point? What's the point of releasing these chemicals if they're not going to actually do what they're supposed to do? So we're just going to kind of shut off the valve for a while. Your brain can rewire itself that way. But at the same time, you have dopamine on top of that that's still enjoying the activity that you're doing and driving you to want to do it more and more and more. So you're bonding, you're becoming addicted, so to speak, to this idea of not really wanting to bond to anybody. And so then imagine doing that for X number of years, and then eventually you find that someone that you kind of want to settle down with. You're like, I actually really, really like this person. We have good chemistry. We're simpatico. Like, we are just two peas in a pod. But then after, like, I don't know, a couple months or so, or even a couple years, you start to feel like this pull away from them. It's your brain that's now wired to think, okay, it's time to move on. No attachment. We're only here for the physical. Let's move on. And that could be detrimental. I mean, imagine a relationship like that where you want to be with this person, but your brain is kind of telling you, don't be with this person, go find somebody else, because you're only here for the physical gratification. Or you stay with that person, but again, you're only there for the physical gratification and nothing else. I mean, relationships are holistic. They're not meant to just thrive on the physical. So yeah, maybe the sex is really good, but intellectually, emotionally, socially, and spiritually, you are not compatible with this person at all. That relationship is going to suffer. And there's going to be other problems that come with that. And so all of that to say, I mean, I said it at the very beginning, the brain is involved in decisions about sex and the events following far more than what seems apparent. And it's because of these powerful neurochemicals that you don't have any control over. And so this is where I'm going to end the video right here. You don't have control over these chemicals. You don't. Their value is neutral. They'll trigger to release whether it's good or bad, a healthy relationship or an unhealthy one, a lifelong commitment or a one-night stand, someone you're really into, someone you're not. It doesn't matter. But the only thing that you have control over in your life is the decisions that you make. That's it. So what we advocate for here, you hear us say it all the time. If you're new here, you're going to start hearing us say it all the time, is make healthy choices. Choose with intent. Actions have consequences. And sometimes the consequences, if you make good choices, are good consequences. But a lot of times, if you're just not really thinking about any of this stuff and you're just kind of, just flying off the seam of your pants, you're not really thinking before you act, and you're just having sex to have sex. Well, it's not just sex. There's way more involved because of what we know about the brain. And this is just scratching the surface. And so we really want to encourage you to just remember this stuff. I'm not saying that you have to completely change who you are, but just take this into consideration before you act next, because there's things that are going to be happening in your brain that you don't have control over, but the only thing that you do have control over is the decisions you make.